All right, welcome to another episode of Remote Voices. We have yet again, as per usual, an amazing guest. Brianne, tell us about yourself, what you do for a living, why you're awesome, and why we should all be listening to you today.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here. Yes, I'm Brianne Fleming. I wear a couple different hats. I teach marketing and social media at the University of Florida. I do that all remotely, so I'm teaching online, but I guess everyone is at this point, but I always have been teaching online. But I also have my own consultancy where I work primarily with fitness brands and help them with their marketing. I have a background working on fitness brands. Most notably, I worked at the corporate office for Orange Theory for almost 4 years, helping get that brand developed and off the ground. But my real baby is talking about pop culture and marketing and sharing lessons that we can learn about marketing from happenings in pop culture. I'm a big believer in that you don't need to only study Apple and Nike and Starbucks to learn about marketing, that you can turn to your favorite TV shows, musicians, movies, and that lessons are all around us. So I blog about that, different pop culture happenings with marketing takeaways. And I also host a podcast about it called Making the Brand.
Wow, that is awesome. That's quite a
Yeah.
lot of achievements there. I'd love to really quickly just dive into your experience teaching online. Like, what tools do you use? How do you communicate with your class? Like, give me kind of the rundown there.
Yeah, so we use Canvas just to house all of our assignments and projects and discussion boards. That's really the home base for everything. But the lectures are all done via Zoom. So I was on I was teaching on Zoom before the whole world was teaching on Zoom, it seems. And aside from that, I also actually have a Facebook group for all of my classes where we'll drop links in there and just have an ongoing discussion. And it's most of my courses are social media courses, so I figured there had to be some social media extension where we gather and share questions.
That makes
and
sense.
talk to each other. So
Do you require your students to be on camera when you teach them remotely on Zoom?
I don't. Most of them do anyway. In at least one of my classes, they have to present a final project where they'll have to. So that's the only time I require it. But also, I mean, I teach in the master's program, so I have some students that work full time. It all takes place in the evening. So I can relate. I'm not always decent in the evenings. You get home from work and you kind of just want to unwind. So if they want to sit there and listen, if they've got kids screaming in the background or if they're multitasking, making dinner, I can't knock them for that. I try to be very understanding.
Makes sense. Makes sense. All right. Well, let's dive into the content for today, where I actually share you guys as well. Cool.
There we go.
You want to read this one, Jordan?
Yeah, sure. So this is from our good friend KP from Cuppa. So he says, if I have one tip for makers wanting to be founders but don't have an audience yet, be a giver. Build an audience by giving value disproportionately. The best values you can give is being yourself, giving without any expectations. And I guess it cuts off. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree with this. I think he's absolutely right. Like, just give without expectations. Like, just be a good person for the sake of being a good person is what I get out of this.
Yeah, I mean, we did this, I think, for years leading up to, Yak's launch. We didn't have much of an established brand, and, brand, obviously we're going to pull you in here in a second to talk about brand, but, we, I think have done a good job of just giving stuff away for free for a long time under the So Friendly brand,
Yep.
building products that we thought were cool. I got super involved in kind of maker communities, giving feedback, helping people out, diving into comments, kind of engaging. Jordan, you and I talk about just engagement in general and how insanely important, just being there, just showing up is half the battle kind of, conversation. And I
Yeah.
think part of that has to do with just kind of this attitude of I'm going to give my time, I'm going to give my involvement. And when it's time for me to launch something and I need your support, those people are actually kind of cheerleaders because they're happy for you. They have seen you go from zero to something and they want to be around to kind of, give you that upvote or share that or retweet that. Brianne, what are your kind of thoughts on this?
Yeah, I like to compare it to just interpersonal relationships. Like, no one likes a friend that only talks about themselves.
100%.
And it's not a good way to build friendships with people, and it's not a good way to build an audience. You can't, communicate selfishly. You have to give and get people to, warm up to you by the things that you share and the things that you're willing to do for people. And again, to do it without any expectations, just to be a good person. So it's always a win-win.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing parallel to draw, because you're right. Like, your personal relationships are the same way. Like, people will notice if you're the guy that's always asking and never giving. And I think that comes across in brand and product as well.
Brianne, I'll humble brag about you here with like what you do with Pop Chat over on Twitter and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a great example of this. Like, there's just so much value in that, and I see it happening on Twitter. I'm like, oh my God, this is like literally captures this tweet perfectly. So,
thank
humble
you.
brag there.
Thank you. I mean, really, it's the people who participate that are giving the value. I'm just asking the question. So I guess you could say that's a little selfish for me, because I'm learning from all of these amazing people who show up and respond. But yeah, we're all kind of sharing with each other and learning from each other. And that's just how you create great relationships. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. For everybody listening, Pop Chat on Twitter. Follow Brianne. Gotta check it out. It's super cool.
Thank you. Yeah, we just wrapped up a session today at 1:00. So every Friday at 1.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to rewind this tweet a little bit and go one level higher, which is I've always, kind of gone by the modicum that you need to build an audience before you ship your product, because you need a captive audience that you can sell into. Brianne, how did you build that audience for that account or any of your personal brands? Like, what was that process like?
Wow. So I really just wanted to create something different when it came to Twitter chats, because I had participated in some, and there are a lot of great ones out there. But I just, again, selfishly, I guess you could say, maybe this is a bad example, but I wanted to create a chat that I would want to participate in. I saw a lot of chats that talked about social media, but it really just focused on the features or the new innovations and the tech behind it. And I wanted to put a fun spin on it and ask how, musicians are using Twitter, or how they're, how Taylor Swift dropped her album at midnight on Spotify and streaming, and how she did all of her social media for a surprise launch. I wanted to apply social media and takeaways to pop culture and just make something different. So everything I was reading about starting a Twitter chat, they said, don't even think about it until you have at least 5,000 followers.
Wow.
And I don't even have 5,000 followers now. I think I had 400 when I started. And again, if you just keep plugging away, it's one thing that I had to be consistent with, because I put it out there every Friday at 1:00. So I've just kept building and keeping up with it. And over time, more and more people are coming, and it's just a blast.
And do you do paid advertising for that, or is it all organic?
All organic right now. Yeah, I just create the questions myself and just put it out there. This week we hosted our first Zoom happy hour meetup with the Pop Chat crew, so they all joined. I haven't monetized it or done anything or had any paid advertising, but it's really just organically getting people to show up and tag and tell their friends, and it's slowly growing, but it's been fun.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
All right, so Jordan, did you read into this one? I didn't.
Of course I did.
Okay, then maybe you can drive this. But essentially, for the listener, Slack has filed an official EU complaint, which I think is interesting that they did it in the EU. But filed an official complaint against Microsoft for competition, I guess. I don't know. Help me flesh this out a little bit more, Jordan.
Yeah, so Stuart made a whole thread on this, basically giving more detail around it. But the general gist of it is that, like, over the years, Microsoft Teams has just gotten to a point where it exists solely to try to pull people away from like enterprise Slack customers. And like, Justin, I know we've talked about this before, but like the way that Teams counts, like I think daily active users or something like that, it's like if you just use the Microsoft suite of tools, like you're inherently considered a user. So it's just like totally blown out of proportion. It's like super misleading. And so it seems like Slack has had enough, and here we are. They are wanting to do something about it.
I find this very interesting. I mean, this tweet in general says life comes at you fast, and on the left we see Slack's official letter kind of welcoming Microsoft Teams or Microsoft to the industry, which is standard. We saw Apple do this years ago. It's like a standard thing to take out like a full page ad in the New York Times and say like, welcome to, whatever, industry you're competing in. But, I've always taken the approach that like competition breeds good markets, right? So like Nilay talks about this a lot at The Verge. Like if we don't have competition, then companies have no incentive to do better. They have no incentive to price better. There's no incentive to price more aggressively. We see this with cell phone carriers. We see this with cable television providers. Like I have no option in my area as to what cable television I get in my house. My internet provider, there's only one person in the area that I can get. So they have zero incentive to price lower than somebody else because I have no other option. So competition is good because it creates, situations where companies have to actually provide value to their customers instead of boxing them in. What I did see that was interesting is Capiche. Matt sent out a newsletter from Capiche today, and the title was, what if your product is just a feature? And, we've talked about this a lot at Yak because a lot of people early on were like, voice messaging, that could just be a feature of Slack or, any of these other tools. And, we've obviously had our answers to this over the years. But what I find interesting is as I dove into that newsletter, I realized they were talking about this. And what they were saying was that Teams is a feature of Office 365, which I had never really thought of. I understand that there is a larger product there, but I always think of Microsoft Teams as an individual feature. But I guess they are right. It is sort of, it's not its own product. It is technically a feature of a much larger product offering, which is inside of Office 365. Bran, what is your initial reaction to this? Do you think that it is fair practice what Microsoft is doing to Slack? Do you think that this is just crying a little bit, or what are your thoughts?
My first reaction or my first impression, this reminds me of what Allbirds did when they noticed
with Amazon.
Yeah.
And
they noticed that Amazon was copying them, but they weren't being sustainable. So they said, hey, actually, here's our formula. We just want to make the world a better place. And instead of, taking shots at them, they saw this as an opportunity to create this learning moment, if you will. So I feel like this is kind of similar in that they're offering to give them some friendly advice, quote unquote, instead of, taking shots at them.
Yeah, but now they've officially filed a complaint, which I think is kind of the difference, is that at first it was like, welcome to the space. We're glad to have some competition in here. Mm-hmm. It's just going to keep us on our toes. And now it's, I assume it's a numbers game. Something must have happened internally where they started to look at, even though they've said, I think Stuart even said this in his thread, like, we haven't lost or we haven't seen a significant loss of like enterprise customers due to this. But there is definitely some kind of catalyst event that, you wouldn't go through all the trouble of filing an official complaint if it wasn't hurting your business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think he even said like they've retained their top 100 enterprise.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah,
but I think it's more like in the weed stuff that's getting under their skin. I mean, I don't think we'll ever know the details, but yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, Bran, that you bring up that Amazon Allbirds thing, because just yesterday, some news dropped about the Alexa fund that they had been in acquisition talks, investing in, and having investment talks with companies, and then going off and building competitor products based off of the knowledge that they gained from, either that intimate investment memos or just being on calls with these startups and getting, traction and, tech, information. And so it is interesting that these behemoth companies, I think Slack is IPO'd. They're a larger company now. I don't think they're anywhere near the size of like a Microsoft or an Amazon, but they're still pretty large. That these behemoth companies are now suddenly getting some flack for being as big as they are, because they have this power to just wipe out the small guys whenever they want to, because of sheer money, team size, capability, whatever it may be. But Bran, what do you think about like that Amazon situation? Is that open game? Is it is it okay to clone Allbirds?
Gosh, as if Amazon needs anything else in their portfolio, like they need to do anything. I agree with Allbirds. I think if you're at least going to copy them, they should at least be sustainable as well. I think that's what all companies should be striving toward, is to be more sustainable or more eco-friendly. And Amazon could be leading the way. And the fact that they didn't there, I think that's a missed opportunity.
Well, I mean, diving into kind of your core skill set here, isn't it ultimately at the end of the day all about brand? Like if Allbirds was so confident in their brand and their ability to execute, shouldn't it not be scary to them? Same thing for Slack, I suppose.
Well, in my opinion, I don't think Allbirds felt really threatened by it. I think they were more so disappointed to see that they weren't sustainable, because that completely goes against what they're trying to do and how they're trying to change the world. So I think more so they wanted to have a heart to heart with Amazon instead of, coming out swinging saying, why are you copying us, and feeling threatened. They just seem to genuinely want to have an open conversation and maybe even partner together, or just find ways that they can both be about brand and purpose and make the world a little bit of a better place.
Yeah, I think I saw recently, I think it was Adams, tweeted out that either Adidas or Nike, I'm feeling like it was Adidas, had copied copied their box design. And a bunch of people in the comments were like, well, that's what you get when you don't patent it. And then the other half of the comments were like, well, it's a box design. You can't really, keep somebody from like making a box. But I find it interesting because at the end of the day, like I am not going to buy a pair of Adidas because of their box, but I definitely would buy a pair of Adams because of their box, because the Adams experience is definitely about the experience overall. It's the love that they put into that product. I just buy Adidas because it's freaking Adidas. I think that's testament to how important brand is and how it drips into every single aspect of it, from the unboxing experience to how you treat your competitors. Because I think what you're saying is Allbirds did it right. Allbirds said, hey, you know what? This is ultimately our mission, and as long as you're aligned with that, I don't really care if you do this. But then we see Slack here saying, you're stealing our customers, which is what competition is supposed to do, right?
Yeah. Well, Allbirds really took the classy route, and instead of, they could have very much also filed a complaint, but now I think they built even more goodwill by taking such a classy approach and just having this honest conversation and open letter. Yeah. So
it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out for Slack, because you're right. There is kind of the classy approach, and then there's the legal approach, I suppose.
Yeah.
So this next tweet says, from a friend at PayPal, we've had Black Friday level daily transaction volume since COVID-19 started, as if you don't need more reasons to be bullish on digital payments. Now, I'm gonna remove this digital payments side of it because I don't know that it's relevant to this conversation. But I was in our local UPS store, and they said for the first month of COVID, every single day they were shipping out the same quantity that they would during Black Friday, receiving and shipping for an entire month. For this first month of COVID. I think it's insanely interesting when we talk about like D2C brands, when we talk about online shopping, Amazon versus, your Best Buys. But I'm curious, Brianne, what you've seen in the market since COVID, how that's affected your business. Have you seen more inbounds? Have you seen less? What's it looked like for you?
Mm-hmm. I've seen more clients just being genuinely interested in content and finally respecting content a little bit more, because I always say that in other recessions or other downturns and other crises, the marketing team used to be the first to go. And I think this time the marketing teams are what's keeping brands afloat with all the live content. Yeah, all the live content that we saw at least early on when COVID started, and just understanding that content is what's going to keep them relevant. So I've seen clients and other brands, just as far as people contacting me, just asking, what do we do from a content standpoint, versus being so concerned about other things that they would have been 10 or 20 years ago. So that was refreshing.
Yeah, I actually think that's super true because I mean, at least from what I've seen, people like couldn't go out and like physically see the products that they were interested in getting or whatever. So it all was just like, oh, I've seen this brand on Twitter before. I've seen this brand on TikTok or Instagram or whatever. And
Hmm.
that's they buy whatever they can relate to immediately. So totally, totally agree with that.
I think what you said is super interesting, that the marketing team was typically the first to go. And we're in a huge economic downturn, regardless of what the stock market may say, there's tons and tons of people out of work. And you're right, there's this interesting moment where because of the way that this happened, the marketing team ends up being actually the most important people to retain,
Right.
because they're the front lines. That's the people that are going to keep your brand in front. So, from this, if we're starting off with this tweet and, they're specifically talking about digital payments, I think you could bookend this with almost anything, bullish on online marketing, bullish on content creation, bullish on, direct to consumer brands, like all these different things that, may have been questionably, at the forefront of a company, and all of a sudden, because it's the only option you have now, are all of a sudden the front line of that company. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out over the long term. Brian, do you think that we're going to see a spike and then a level off? Do you think it's just going to rocket from here and continue to be uptrend? What do you think?
A spike in digital payments or transactions?
No, just I guess in this new world of online everything, online payments, online, content, everything you're doing, do you think you're going to see more, clients continue to come in, or do you think it'll fall off eventually as, things maybe go back to normal?
I think people are getting more comfortable doing things remotely and digitally, and they're looking for more opportunities to kind of scale down and optimize. I think we'll also see a spike in people turning to freelancers versus big agencies because, hey, if we're going to work remotely, why should I work remotely with a huge agency
Mm.
necessarily when I can also work remotely with an individual or a small group who can give me more individualized attention. So I think there's been this mindset shift in how people are approaching work, and that it's all just going to keep going up as far as digital is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this all the time, the fact that this was a big catalyst event for the global economy. The fact that before you may have thought twice about hiring someone from a different country, a different time zone, a different location, and now it's like, well, it doesn't make any difference. The guy that lived, next to my office was the only option I had, and it's the same exact experience working with him versus working with somebody in a completely different country. Why not, expand our horizons and hire outside of our immediate 30-mile radius?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this next tweet: copywriting as a craft is harder than writing books. Similarly, advertising is harder than filmmaking. Brienne, this is probably your bread and butter. You want to dive into this?
Well, I wish I could speak from experience because I haven't written a book. So, although it's on my bucket list.
There you go.
Um, Gosh, I mean, I guess that's a relief because I love copywriting and that seems to come, it's definitely a craft, but it comes kind of easily to me. It's something I enjoy doing. So if that's harder than writing a book, then I better
Then you'd be
So
good to go. I mean, for me, I think
yeah,
this is an attention span thing, right? With a book, I mean, I don't know what the average page length of a book is, but let's say you've got 100 pages to capture somebody's attention before they put that book down to decide if it's, not right for them or not. On a website, you've got like 2 seconds to
Right.
capture somebody's attention and, get them to scroll further on that website. How do you think about this as you're working with your clients, as you're working with brands? You said you're a copywriter yourself. How do you think about, that kind of time to attention capture?
It's funny. I was tweeting today about Taylor Swift's album, like I have been doing the past 24 hours, it seems. And I retweeted what this radio station tweeted. They were saying that, or they asked their audience, which one of her songs hit you the hardest? And I just love that because it didn't say which song is your favorite.
Mm.
It said which hit the hardest. And I retweeted it and I said, great writing is felt. And the same goes with copywriting. If you can get people to feel something or to feel like they've been seen and that you understand them in that short moment that you have to connect with them, that's when you've done your job right.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, the second part of this tweet is about advertising being harder than filmmaking. And I think that's something that we struggled with, with our hype videos that we make for like launches. It's like, how do you get 30 seconds of information out in a video and someone come away from that with, there's either a call to action, but also there's kind of like an emotional response and an intelligent response. We want them to know things. We want them to feel things. And it's amazing how much you have to cram into 30, 45 seconds.
Yeah. So 2 things here. So one, Jake in the comments said, books don't have a directly attributable CTA. And I think I agree with that. I think the other difference here is that books are totally subjective to the author. Likewise with films, like it's totally subjective to the director's own thoughts. Whereas like copywriting or creating like an advertisement, you are inherently reliant on, I guess, people going out to like see that, like that is the pitch. The book is like, all right, you like the book or you don't, or you like the film or you don't, versus like the piece of copy or the piece of, advertisement that you put out has to like directly relate to whatever it is that you're trying to convey.
Yeah. And filmmaking, I mean, it's such a broad term, but I kind of wish that advertisers would take more of a filmmaker's approach, because a large part of filmmaking is, if you strip it down, it's entertainment and entertaining your audience. And advertising, I think we get so tripped up on making sure we get people to buy that we forget to entertain. But if you entertain people and they feel engaged in what you're putting out there, they'll be more likely to buy.
Yeah, and what's interesting for me on what you just said is what we found, especially in our own brand, is that the story is what has been so impactful. We continue to tell our story over and over again. The underdog story, 3 guys from Florida launch a product by accident, get a bunch of traction, magically raise VC off of Twitter. And like this kind of rags to riches story seems to resonate with people. And I think that that's really true in advertising as well. Like, I don't know if this rings a bell with you, but I love Subaru's commercials. They have these like very like solemn, like very like story driven commercials where a teenage kid is standing outside of a crumpled car and they're holding their the shifter knob, and it says, like, I'll never forget my first Subaru, because it saved their life, right? Is kind of like the story there, because they're so well constructed. And they're just like emotionally gripping, and like I remember those commercials. I can't name a single other car commercial, but for some reason that commercial like stuck with me because they told a story that aligned with their brand. And I understood that their brand mission was like, we take care of your family, not we're the fastest car, or we're the sexiest car, or, this is the car that's going to make all of your friends jealous. It was, we take care of your family. And my first thought was like, wow, I get it. Like, I resonate with that. Like, that's the car I would buy my kid, because I know that that's your brand mission.
Right. It made you feel something. And while we're on the subject of storytelling, I see Jake is saying storytelling converts. People want the arc, the drama, the resolution. Absolutely. And if I could, I'd like to recommend my favorite storytelling book. It's called Stories That Stick by Kindra Hall. And she really introduces a framework to storytelling. We hear the term storytelling all the time, but I feel like her book is one of the few that really gives you the how. And as far as the arc, the drama, the resolution, she offers up this framework called normal, explosion, new normal. And it's funny, she actually compares it to why that Peloton commercial was such a horror, was because they didn't paint a picture of what the normal was like. You have to kind of set the stage and show people what life was like before this pivotal moment, before that explosion, and then get into the new normal and how your life is better since buying the car, since getting on the bike, or signing up for Peloton. So she just has a lot of really great storytelling insights.
Man, it's such a great example of a ad that was beautifully produced, wonderfully made, and just fell so flat because the story was so abrasive and it didn't communicate what it wanted to communicate to its audience. Like, its audience was their, captive audience looking for this ad. And when they kind of like heard the story, it was insulting almost. And you could tell that like there was a misfire somewhere in the writing department of what story are we telling. So yeah, it's amazing that you brought that up as an example, because I think that's one of the best examples of how you can be amazing at the 90% of what goes into filmmaking, casting, lighting, shooting, cinematography, everything, but then just the storyline is the part that fails, and now it's not having a remote impact.
Right. Yeah. They didn't set up the normal. If we had known that this mother or this wife of his that he bought the bike for, if we knew that she was working, 80 hours a week, or had just, I don't know, gone through something really emotional, she lost a friend, or whatever her normal looked like before she got this bike, we would have been more receptive to her getting it as a gift. We would have understood it better.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Jordan, you want to read this last one?
Yeah, sure. So it says, venture capital basically runs on gossip and FOMO. You try to get gossip on which companies are killing it, you try to get in, and then you try to create FOMO for everyone else. Rinse, repeat. I think we can definitely speak to the FOMO piece, that's for sure. I think this is super true. I think the FOMO thing, it's like once somebody gets a hint of what someone's up to, it just gets blown out of the water. And I think we're seeing this right now with a lot of companies.
I have literally read this tweet out loud on the last 5 phone calls that I've been on, just talking to other startup founders. I talked to a guy, I think yesterday, who is going into his first VC meeting. He's never, done a VC pitch before. He just wanted some tips. How should I run it? What should I know? What questions should I ask? And the number one tip that I gave him was this. I was like, look, man, having an air of mystery about you is actually incredibly helpful. If you can make that VC think that there's something they might be missing out on, they will go tell all their other VC friends, I think there's something we're missing out on. And then that just drives more and more, conversations internally. And, to be honest, kind of bring this into Brianne's world, I think that this is directly relatable to brands. I heard once that one of Kanye's biggest things that he did with Yeezys when he first launched was just put out of stock on the website before they'd sold a single pair, so that as soon as they launched, everyone went to the website and it just showed out of stock, so that everyone went, oh my god, these things are selling like hotcakes, I have to get in. And so building that sense of fear of missing out is inherent to a good brand. It's inherent to Supreme, like Jake said in the comments. Supreme is a great example. I don't know why people are paying $110 for a can of Altoids with the Supreme logo, but they're very difficult to get a hold of, and so they will. Brianne, what's your reaction?
Well, I think you could even change venture capital to marketing here. Anytime, you bring up the Yeezys and how they put out of stock on them before they even sold any. That reminds me of one of the first lessons I learned in PR and in marketing, is that perception is reality. And if people think that they're sold out, that they're selling like hotcakes and everyone is flocking to them, that's going to inspire them to want to do the same.
Yeah. Marketing, swap that word out with sales, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, it is your job in a sales situation to tell the person that is a limited time deal. If they don't pull the trigger right now, they're going to miss out. And that applies to basically anything. I think we've seen in our industry this whole invite only, fiasco. I think there was a tweet the other day that was like, it's the year 2025. Everything is invite only. Good luck getting into your gym unless you know somebody. And that's the same thing, right? It's driving that idea of, scarcity. And that's what drives that. Jake saying hey email is a great example. Yeah. We saw those hey emails selling for $400 on eBay.
Yeah,
and
people were literally trying to buy them off us. It was nuts.
And then a day later
with that.
No, really?
No.
Okay, so the guys from Basecamp launched hey.com, which is a new email service. It was invite only at the beginning. And so if you got an invite, you got 2 other invites that you could share with people. And so Twitter was just this constant source of hey, do you have an invite? Can you send it to me? And then you'd be like, oh no, I gave mine to this person. Oh, do you have an invite? And it just kind of created this cascading effect of constantly, people getting hit up for invites, but then they were being sold on eBay for $400. What I find hilarious about that is that they opened it up to everybody like a day after that. So all these people just paid $400 for something they could have just waited 24 hours for. But because they didn't know and there was that fear, they were willing to pay that amount of money.
Wow. Yeah, I'll have to look. How recently was that?
Last month.
Like a month, ish, maybe. Yeah,
maybe a little bit less.
It just speaks to human nature. It's not even marketing. I mean, to just feel like you're missing out on something. It's just who we are as people. We want to be involved. We crave connection. So that definitely translates into marketing and sales and apparently venture capital.
Now, in your Facebook group that you do for your community, is that invite only?
I only do the Facebook group for my students. So yeah,
Okay.
Keep that private, but my pop chat, that's open to everyone. But I did, like I said, I hosted, or did I mention it? Yeah, I hosted a virtual happy hour this week, and I did have some people feeling sorry that they missed it after it was over. So hopefully that inspires them to join the next one.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, Yak started out as invite only. I think for us, it gave us an opportunity to be very close to our initial set of users and get really close to them on that iteration cycle. Hey, what are you using it for? What features can I add that would make this magical for you? And there was an opportunity, I think, to drive a little bit of a hype cycle there. But for us, it was more about the intimacy with our core user group and being able to get really close to them. And at scale, that's fairly difficult. And, so there's a lot of advantages to doing kind of the invite only thing. But, I think to go back to the original tweet, marketing, sales, whatever word you throw in there, I think one thing that I've realized as we've raised a couple rounds now for Yak is venture to capital, it's marketing, it's sales.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's all brand, all marketing. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just talking to Devram, the founder of SuperPeer, and he said not until he did SuperPeer did he realize the insane importance of brand. Like, the fact that you can launch something that's near identical to something else in the marketplace, but as long as you just slay it on the brand side, people will fall in love with that brand. They will remember that brand. They like that logo. Jordan, you've seen just like the amount of people that have requested a Yak swag box from us.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely super true. Last night, Josh Constantine and Reggie from Eternal were talking about this on Clubhouse, speaking of FOMO. And basically the conversation was around if you have good brand and you can just make some hype, basically you can build a business, which is crazy to think about. That's really all you need to ground is just some good design, some FOMO, make people feel like it's super exclusive. I guess these days a test flight build for your product and you're good to go.
Oh man, I don't know that I'm a fan of that, but I certainly understand the fact that is the new normal. Brian,
well, obviously it's the watered down of a version of a 3-hour conversation, but yeah, the genesis is that it's all built on brand and marketing these days.
Brian, what are some branding tips around that kind of notion that you would give your clients and customers?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because you're always going to be, whether it's your brand or personal branding, your corporate company or your personal brand, you're always going to be competing with other people. There's going to be companies that sell something similar, or there's going to be other professionals who do what you do, who you're competing with. And like you guys were saying, the brand is the opportunity to set yourself apart. So even if on paper you guys look identical, you have to find something that you can lean into that makes you different. So, an easy example is Wendy's. They're competing with McDonald's and Burger King and all of these brands, but simply by having this kind of savage, sassy
Twitter account.
Yeah, everyone's talking about, and we have been for years talking about their Twitter account. So their burgers and their fries and everything isn't necessarily better than McDonald's or Burger King, but they just found their own way to cut through the competition and stand out just by being different. So that's something I preach to my clients, to my students all the time. And it's something that I try to do every day. I mean, as I'm staring at the screen and looking at my headshot now, anytime I see my headshot in a lineup, I'm the only one that has pink as my background. It's usually, a simple black and gray gradient background. Just find simple little elements that you can do to differentiate yourself so people remember you.
Yeah. What do you think kind of about the balance between corporate and personal branding, especially for kind of startup audiences where we have like a founder and then you have the brand that the founder has built? What's the balance to strike there?
I think founders should be very active and be the face of their brand as often as they can be, because again, we want to resonate with people. Yes, there are great brands out there that have really noble purposes and things that we can get behind, but the more that you can put a face and a story to a corporation, I mean, I'll use Orange Theory as an example. Our founder, she is in her 60s, she was in her late 50s at the time, and she started Orange Theory because she was let go from her job and she was a single parent and she had no choice but to start a business. So she was doing Pilates out of her home, and she eventually signed a lease and started running Pilates out of one small studio. And it turns out that one of her clients that was coming there said, "You need to franchise this. You need to talk to my husband. He's really involved in franchising. I think you can do that." And she didn't believe in herself, and she was just this individual who became an entrepreneur in her 50s, who again was a single mother. And I feel like once you hear that story, it makes you want to latch on to the Orange Theory brand a bit more. And I think a lot of other companies can learn from that by being the face and sharing their own personal story, even if you are a corporation.
Wow, I did not know that that was kind of the history there. That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I mean, Jordan, would you say that Virgil is, the brand that we all, love? It's not Off-White.
I mean, I think that's true for a lot of these big companies like Virgil and Off-White, Kanye, and Yeezy. If you want to make it more relatable to like the brand and marketing startup scene, like Gary Vee and VaynerMedia, I think all of these people are this like what capture or like what makes their respective brands and companies, and that's why people love them.
It's almost easy to forget that Gary Vee even has companies, right? Because he is the brand.
And I'm sure there's like super talented people that work at Vayner. I mean, well, I guess we know some, right? But like, I think like if it wasn't for him, I don't think Vayner would have the same oomph that it has in the industry without him.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell my students, don't hide behind your brand. Especially you see it on Instagram, you'll go on someone's feed and you won't see any pictures of them. And I want to know who's behind this account, who's sharing these great photos, these great ideas. I want to get to know the person that's behind the content. So the more that you can show your face and represent who you are, I think that's always a win.
Awesome. So as we kind of wrap up here, Brianne, is there any what's one tip that you would want to give every listener here, just in regards to branding or marketing or starting a company? Like what's a tip?
I would say my tip is to be a little weirder, to be honest.
All right.
If you've ever read Purple Cow by Seth Godin, he talks all about taking creative risks. And there are so many brands that they just play it safe in their marketing. But again, to use fast food as an example, everyone was talking about the Moldy Whopper a couple months ago that they did. I don't know if you saw that.
Mm-mm.
So Burger King did a time lapse showing that their burgers or their Whoppers, if you leave them out,
they mold.
They're going to mold.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it was this message just standing by their ingredients and how they don't use preservatives and things. And I can only imagine that, walking into a CEO's office and saying, "Hey, I have this great idea. Let's show our product getting moldy." It's an idea that would get dismissed probably immediately and that you really have to pay off. But the ideas that are weird and outlandish and kind of outrageous, those are the ones that get talked about. So don't be afraid to take creative risks, to be yourself. I try to do it every day. I'm, talking about marketing, but I'm also talking about like the Backstreet Boys and the Jonas Brothers, but it's just my fun way of connecting with people. So be yourself and be weird. It's what's going to make you memorable.
That's awesome. I think that's great advice. I wrap that up in the startup terminology and say, find your unfair advantage. Like what's the thing that sets you apart from everybody else? Whether that's a feature, it's your background, it's your engineering skill, it's your knowledge in a certain area. And I think when it comes to brand, I think Amelia has done a pretty good job with the Yak brand of just being loud and obnoxious on Twitter. And, I think we've kind of like owned that style of marketing. So yeah, I agree. I think that's a great simple tip. So as we wrap up, where can people find you? Where can people join your chats online?
Yeah.
Drop some social handles and some links.
Oh, cool. So you can listen to my podcast. It's called Making the Brand on Spotify, Apple, all those places. And my Twitter chat is every Friday at 1 Eastern. You can follow me at Brianne2K. I'll drop my handle in here. But following the hashtag PopChat. And my website is briannefleming.com.
Awesome. Well, we are super pumped to have you on. Thank you so much for dropping all your knowledge. And I'm going to play us out with some music then.
Sounds good. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.